Descent of the Demon God. By Hanjo Wiolia. Chapter 229. Demon God. Part 1. Lord. Yes. Chen Yuan's subordinates, who were watching the broadcast on their phones, cheered at the same time. They were worried that they had suddenly lost contact with their lord, but when he showed up against the enemy without any wounds on his body, their fears disappeared. Ah. As expected of my lord. Hee. He surprised even me. Hu Bong ran excitedly all over the place. Becky just shook his head at the scene. Like Hu Bong, he too was relieved, but was even more shocked at the power he saw. He got stronger? He wondered how much his lord had become stronger, as the strength Chen Yuan displayed now was extraordinary. In a matter of seconds, the chaos was put to sleep, and the massacre was stopped in an instant. Lord has been that way since the past. Becky smiled. Chen Yuan was someone with such overwhelming strength that he was a form of support for those who followed him. Chen Ma. The golden Gumiho's eyes fluttered when she looked at his subordinates. No one recognized it since she was in fox form, but she wasn't in awe of his power, but rather full of sadness. Is he even higher? The power that Chen Yuan just displayed was too high. The first Chen Ma began to slowly drift away once he had reached this level, so her heart grew bitter. Meanwhile, there was cheering from the others in China. Wah! Everyone cheered for their savior. The broadcast, which was happening in real time, was the prelude to the end. Everyone watched it with despair and horrified faces, but Chen Yuan was a ray of hope now. People clasped their hands together and hoped for him to succeed. May that man stop this apocalypse. Please. I don't know who he is. Please take this disaster down, please. Earnestness shone from the deep darkness, and the fear that had taken over China was finally overtaken by the light. God narrowed his eyes. Fear is dying. Even if he was artificially created, he was definitely a transcendent being. Since he was born with malicious intent and negative emotions, the despair of the humans amplified his power. However, people were now full of hope. You are obstructing the cause till the very end, demon god. Goo. With that, God spread out his 8 red wings, and the space around shook. It had the momentum to take down the entire city, but God then frowned. What are you doing? Let this old man take over from here. Another voice said. And pass this chance? That is unnecessary. I, the king, agree. We are gods, so we should focus on achieving the purpose over going after such victories. If that man isn't killed, we can't achieve any purpose. No matter how it goes, defeating him won't be difficult. Then give the body to this old man. You are bound by foolish feelings and stubbornness. 2 personalities were on one side, and the third on another. A red glow began to emanate from God's eyes as an unimaginable killing intent rose. Ah! The 2 angels to God's side were taken aback, and their bodies began to scatter from the bloodlust. PSSS. G God? Why? The 2 angels couldn't hide their shock. God slowly spoke to them. You are afraid. That's not true. You have proven to be unworthy. One of the angels begged. G God, please give me a chance for the sake of the relationship. PSSS. However, before the angel could even finish pleading, his body turned to dust. Chen Yuan was awestruck by the sight of God throwing away his own angels just because they showed fear. You are truly crazy. At those words, the being called God smiled. Well, they were just objects that needed to be purified. You will be the only one left in the world then. Purification shows no discrimination. It is the ultimate mercy to make sure everyone has an equal end. Mercy? You think that is mercy? You're hilarious. Chen Yuan took care of his subordinates, so God's mentality didn't sit well with him. Looking at Chen Yuan, God spoke with his arms wide open. The world is full of selfishness, discrimination, persecution, and filthy desires. How can a mere human like you understand what it means to purify the world anew? God harbored a bizarre amount of anger towards the world. Huh? Chen Yuan snorted in response. Chen Yuan had never thought that the world was clean, but he could never agree with the absurd conclusion that only one entity should handle the cleansing of all filth. Are you bringing the end? This is what I, as God, should have done in the first place, so that such beings don't remain in this world. Chen Yuan frowned. It was absurd to hear God spout such nonsense. Someone has to do it, and the only one who can do it is me. Whoa. Pachik. As the space shook, the artificial god created a blood-red sword. The moment Chen Yuan saw it, he recognized it. Space sword that I used. It was the sword that held the power of space. Chen Yuan's supreme sky demon sword synergized with the void, which had dealt the final blow to Cho Yeshin. God smiled and said, "Although you are just a human, I have learned a lot from you." Quack. The whole place, when struck by the blood-red sword, shattered. My body surpasses you. Shoo. The space shook, and God disappeared, suddenly reappearing in front of Chen Yuan and trying to stab him in the neck. It was a simple stab motion, but it had the force to pierce everything in existence. Crack. Chen Yuan's hand motioned, distorting the space and creating a dark sword to block God's attack. Quang. When the two swords collided, the space around shuddered. Storms were created from the impact, and they wreaked havoc when the aftermath reached the ground. Shoo. The buildings, which couldn't survive the impact, turned to ashes. Hundreds of people who were unconscious on the floor disappeared. You haven't been able to stop the purification. PRR. God spoke in a sarcastic manner while still wielding his sword. Looking at his relaxed attitude, he wasn't even using his full strength. God, who judged that he was stronger than Chen Yuan, smiled. Is this really the end? The god raised more energy, and the entire space around Chen Yuan distorted as he was pushed back. Then, God said, "You seem to be stronger than before, although it will end here." At those words, Chen Yuan raised his head. A light shone in his eyes. This? It wasn't sky demon energy, and it wasn't the killing intent either. It was a strange feeling, like the chaos around. Chen Yuan said, "I asked if this is the end. I see that you have energy." PRR. At that moment, as Chen Yuan was being pushed, he started to raise his arms. God increased the power he was using to push Chen Yuan back, but God himself began to be pushed back. Chen Yuan spoke coldly to God. "Do you think such a dry reason would work on me? What are you talking? Huh?" Pang. The artificial god's body was suddenly thrown up. God was flustered, he didn't expect himself to be thrown. Considering that he had been careless because of his new body, God still tried to show his power to Chen Yuan, as a bloody, red aura swirled around like a halo. Whoa! Chen Yuan appeared right in front of him, and lowered his sword as he spoke with a meaningful voice. "This world belongs to me." What? The artificial god pulled out his space sword up in a hurry. The moment both swords touched, something shocking happened. Quack. Cha-cha-cha-cha. The artificial god broke through the wall behind him and bounced back. His body was pushed so far back that he crossed the borders of Xi'an City and beyond. Quack quack quang. Only after being hurled back for over 3 kilometers was he able to stop his motion. Unable to hide his shock, he raised his head. What is that power? That force? The other 2 personalities inside, too, were shocked. They all knew about Chen Yuan's power because their memories were shared, but it seemed like he had grown even further. Talicia's voice said, "Change right away." That guy is dangerous. However, Cho Yeshin rejected the idea. No, I couldn't have a proper fight with him. That machine, and you cannot handle him. Stop being stubborn. Shoo. Chen Yuan appeared right in front of him. Talisha could no longer look down on this human with any arrogance. Cho Yeshin then said, "Are you trying to protect the humans?" He thought that was why Chen Yuan had blown them out of the city. Chen Yuan smiled. "No, I was just showing off my power." Shoo. Chen Yuan's form disappeared again. God used all his senses to calculate Chen Yuan's position and properly defend himself, swinging the space sword to the right. Shoo. As expected, Chen Yuan appeared to the right. Got you. But when both the swords collided, the result was shocking. Pachik. The space sword that contained the destructive killing intent shattered into pieces. Once again, the body of the artificial god flew back. Quack. Quack quack quang. Again, several kilometers of land passed by as God's body flew through the air. When half of God's strength was exhausted to stop flying back, it seemed that his upper body was gone. Seeing that he had lost the body of a transcendent being, Cho Yeshin thought that the situation was absurd. How? How can this happen? He couldn't understand it. The realization of the universe that Chen Yuan obtained was something that Cho Yeshin had realized in his final moments. This realization, along with the AI's computation powers and Talisha's strength, were used to create the artificial god. Even though all of these components had come together to create this god, such a being couldn't stop a mere blow of a human. Step. God then saw Chen Yuan walking toward him while giving out tremendous intimidation. It was hard to believe that a human was exuding such pressure. Is this all? God clenched his teeth. Grunt. Every single time, you blocked our path. Demon God. Shoo. God's body was restored instantly, displaying an amazing regeneration ability. I will see the end along with you. Pong. Brilliant blood-colored wings spread across God's back. Blood-red feathers came out from them and surrounded Chen Yuan as if they were weapons. When the artificial god held his sword, the blood feathers turned into a space sword. Quang. I will bet everything on this one strike. 100 martial arts of blood-killing sword and ever-changing blood flower. The synergy of these two forms was the manifestation of Cho Yeshin's realization after getting the body of God. If he stops this, then I will admit that he is the best in the world of martial arts. Shoo. As soon as the artificial god stretched out his sword toward Chen Yuan, the space sword surrounded him in all directions, and petals drew red trajectories in the air. It was impossible to know where the petals were flying in from, as their trajectories couldn't be read. Shoo. This sword formation would be considered to be the best, as it was the greatest technique of Cho Yeshin, who was a genius in martial arts. At that moment, Chen Yuan held his own black space sword. That'll be useless. The artificial god had faith in his technique and confidence that no one could stop him. Chen Yuan slowly lowered his black space sword. Swish. However, he lowered his sword to reach the space and not the floor. The floor rattled like glass around the space he struck, which split into thousands and then tens of thousands of shards. This was the Supreme Sky Demon Void Sword, the signature demon god sword art technique. Innumerable black lines soared in the cracked space and penetrated the red traces around Chen Yuan. Papa Pack. God's eyes shook. His trust in the skills was shattered in an instant. How can he have such a sword? The soaring black lines were beautiful. His technique, which he thought could never be stopped, was taken down by the countless black lines created by Chen Yuan. PSSS. His martial arts is. In the end, he couldn't get past Chen Yuan even if he had turned into a transcendent being. Quack. Blue blood gushed out of the artificial god's mouth. Chapter 230. Demon God. Part 2.
6. Talisha, the worst Talisha in history. He was known as the Golden Heavenly King of the Heaven clan. He went to Earth to look for his nemesis, Arsha, but was captured and experimented on by MS Group instead. His body was used to make the artificial god.
As his final attempt was broken, the artificial god staggered back from a probable internal wound. He mumbled in shock. "This world is cruel to me till the end." Thud. He knelt on one knee. His eyes gave out a red gleam that seemed dull like a dead human. It was a defeat that couldn't be changed. Rather than the pain in his body, his mind seemed dead. Phew. Whoa. Chunyoan, who saw that, withdrew the black space. He certainly drove the mind of the opponent into the abyss. Then, only one thing is left? Chunyoan breathed Sky Demon energy into the wrist, and the Sky Demon sword came out. Cha-cha-cha. Holding it, he approached the god who was dead on the inside, and then he heard someone's cry. "Look! What are you doing? Hurry up and annihilate the body." It was Elder Jikmi. He was watching this from far, urging for God to be killed. Chunyoan shook his head. "I have to figure out more things about this." The last person to know the whereabouts of his descendants was this artificial god. It wasn't known if they knew about the time pack, but he had to try. There is no time for that. No matter how it was created, it is a transcendent being. It means that a small gap is enough to turn things around. Hurry and kill it. Elder Jikmi didn't seem comfortable with this. Despite seeing the power of Chunyoan, he couldn't calm down. The entire area was still in red and filled with despair, which could bring back chaos at any time. However, Chunyoan ignored the elder's words and used the ghost chi into the sword. Who? Negative blue energy rose from it, and then Chunyoan looked at the artificial god. "You know about it, right? Where is the brain of Chun Musong?" "SSSS." Then, the wings of God, who was kneeling, were dyed in gold from black. And the eyes lifted weren't red anymore. The god spoke with an ominous smile. "Thank you for freeing me." A completely different atmosphere. Chunyoan frowned. Previously, the artificial god seemed like a supernatural one, but now he felt some glorious feeling coming from his opponent. "Let me treat you right." The god tried to keep up from the kneeling position. So tiring. Chunyoan used the black space sword again and tried to slash the god again. The artificial god tried to block as he felt the vicious energy. His eyes fluttered. Quack. And his eyes turned golden. At that moment, the world seemed covered by white light. Weak. Shit. Elder Jikmi was in despair as he witnessed the black space sword trying to cut the god down. Slowed down. SHHHH. That wasn't the only thing that stopped. The flowing light, the wind, and everyone's movement stopped. The world was colored in silence and stillness. Shoo! And the form of God appeared from high above the white light where everything stopped. A cold sweat ran down his face. Shoo! Blue veins appeared on God's face, and there was anger too. This guy. God didn't think he would have to use his power to stop time like this. However, he was angry because he couldn't overcome the fear of being hit by Chunyoan's sword aiming at him, so he flew up. Why did it come from a lowly human? This wasn't the first time he felt the fear of death. The fear of that sword killing him was engraved into his soul. As a result, he couldn't stand staying in front of it and stopped time. This was shameful to him. The shame turned to hatred and anger. I will destroy it. I will destroy everything. I will leave nothing behind here. The artificial god raised his hands, and a giant golden sphere began to form. Goo! It was a gigantic sphere of 500 meters in diameter. An unimaginably enormous amount of energy was used. Even a nuclear bomb would seem ridiculous. The moment this falls, it will destroy the entirety of Asia. This is God's gift. You lowly beings will perish without even realizing that death came. His eyes were dyed in madness. Driving people into fear was good for him, and now extinction would fall on them. Then, the sphere moved. Wuong. If the time hadn't stopped, everyone would have been in fear, because they would be watching the end with their own eyes. The golden sphere began to destroy the land. Pong! Chen Yuan was on the ground as he also couldn't move. Even if death was upon him, he was bound to the time. As a human, he couldn't escape it, no one can. Ba-dump. He heard his heart beating. In the still time, Chen Yuan's eyes shrank. He focused and looked at the place, the moment he was caught up in the explosion. Quack quack quang. In that brief moment, while enormous energy was raging around exploded, the realization of the universe and the truth that he had been stopped in time were understood. As his sixth and seventh senses were awakened in the moment of crisis, Chen Yuan's eyes broke the boundary between the three dimensions and saw a new dimension. He was thrilled with joy and thrill and saw Mun Ku, whom he missed so much. No. No. I need to stop this. He wanted to dodge this. He didn't want to enter some new realm. He didn't want to become stronger, he wanted to return to his people. However, the truth and the new world, after death, were so powerful that it wanted Chen Yuan to give up this world. At that moment, light and darkness shone together, and someone appeared. Pang! This new world that was pulling in Chen Yuan was stopped. And from there, a man stood tall, supporting Chen Yuan. Ah! To Chen Yuan, who didn't escape from the crisis by himself, this someone that helped him seemed familiar. And then he heard the voice in his head. You are such an odd one. The voice he heard here was so familiar that he mumbled. Ancestor? It was the voice of his ancestor. It looked like a haze between the borders to him, and the one who stopped him from being pulled into another dimension was none other than Chen Ma. How come you don't want to enter where everyone wants to go? That. Is it because of longing or regret? Despite Chen Yuan not answering, he knew. Shoo. As the haze rose, the figure of his ancestor could be seen. I came out to meet you, thinking that a guy who can barely deal with me was finally coming. The man who left a lot behind is here. Ha ha ha. His ancestor laughed. There was arrogance, tenderness, and even boldness oozing out. He was laughing toward the boundary. Ancestor? Chen Ma spoke to the bewildered Chen Yuan without looking back. How can I, as your ancestor, just watch you silently when you are going through so much? But he was crossing the border. It will be difficult to pull him back. At that time, Chen Ma reached out and pointed to the boundary. The boundary swayed like a wave, and soon the will, which had drawn Chen Yuan to cross it, waned. Blocking the will of dimensions, beyond borders? It was amazing. His ancestor blocked the interference. My descendant, the one who will inherit the will of this throne of mine, get rid of all your regrets and troubles first and then come. Until then, I will be here protecting this. Hearing that, Chen Yuan cried. He was filled with the feeling of knowing that someone stronger was firmly behind him. And the fact that this man believed in him touched his heart. Shoo! The open boundary to cross was closed. He looked at the strong back of his ancestor, which was turning to a haze. Be there till the end. If you have an infinite amount of will to do something, there is nothing you cannot achieve. The final words of his ancestor, Chen Ma, resonated in his mind. It went deep inside him. Pound. With infinite will, anything can be achieved. Pound. Infinite will. Pound. one's will. The path of the sword broke the stillness in the currently still world. It moved slowly, and then a bit faster. The eyes of the god went wide. How? Time stopped. However, in this still world, the sword of Chen Yuan was moving. It cannot be. It cannot be. There is no way a bug like a human can surpass the power of this body who obtained the level of a god. Kuk. The golden sphere fell, and the sword of Chen Yuan began to move faster and faster upwards, pointing to the sky. Supreme Sky Demon Sword Technique, will of the user. Chuck. 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 Countless black lines hit the golden sphere. Then, the sphere began to disintegrate as if it didn't exist. The god who was supposed to be on top of everything was shocked and in ruins. Then, he looked at the form of Chen Yuan, who was flying up at a tremendous speed. In his sphere, a single form overlapped. Arisha? He couldn't figure out why he thought of that man, but then Chen Yuan's form passed by him. Shoo! And with a sharp sense spread around his whole body, the feeling of being cut into pieces. God shook his head and turned back. He saw the hand of Chen Yuan holding a ball that was the size of a fist, with golden, red, and gray colors. No, that is? He was bewildered. However, Chen Yuan broke it right away. Crack! As the trapped lights were broken, they seeped into Chen Yuan's palm. Swoosh! As the light seeped in, numerous visions were seen. They were memories. I am not a mistake. I am not a mistake. Right, if you people want it, I will become the heavenly killing star and kill everything. I will destroy it all. The emotions of a life full of bitterness and madness. Arisha lost all his powers and is on earth? How can, with a human body, like this? Memories of Talisha being taken down with a sword. Yes. From now you are Demon God. Supercomputer Demon God. Ha ha ha. Why do I have to listen to someone's orders? I am free. Eh. Looking at everything, countless memories flow in. Chen Yuan accepted them all with eyes that seemed to see everything in the world. PRRR. How can a human see? Chen Yuan spoke in a cold voice to the artificial god, who was in despair. Don't feel too bad. Fake god. What? Your opponent was the demon god. With that, Chen Yuan drew his sword. Slash. The body of the artificial god, which was barely holding on, was scattered like dust. In other words, he disappeared from this world,